Over on Jaguar 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about the player on the Milwaukee Brewers that got invited to the MLB All-Star Game to start at second base, even though he never played second base. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1967 NFL Draft was an awfully good one for the Minnesota Vikings, and you could absolutely make the argument that to this day, it remains the greatest draft in franchise history. The draft was widely praised at the time, with one columnist in the immediate aftermath even going as far as saying that this was the greatest draft in pro football history. And while I might not necessarily go that far, the fact that this insanely outlandish take, saying right after a draft happened that it was the greatest of all time, actually aged pretty well, is remarkable. In total, the Vikings drafted 4 guys who would start for years for the team and make the Pro Bowl. You had wide receiver Gene Washington, who made 2 Pro Bowls and had the 4th most receiving touchdowns in 1969, when the Vikings made it to their first Super Bowl in franchise history. You had Bobby Bryant, a 2-time Pro Bowl defensive back who played 13 seasons in Minnesota and recorded 51 interceptions. And you had Alan Page, maybe the greatest player in Vikings history, and one of the greatest defensive tackles and defenders to ever grace this sport. Honestly, the Vikings could have spent the rest of their picks on long snappers, and this still would have been an A+ draft class. Washington Page Bryant is a heck of a haul. But I did say that they had 4 guys who made the Pro Bowl. And the 4th man is the man that you've been watching this whole time, wide receiver Bob Grimm. And the story of how the Vikings won his services is absolutely insane, and more than half a century later, deserves to be remembered for just how stupid it is. The bad news for the Vikings after the draft concluded was that they were not the only team vying for his services. The good news? The other teams shot themselves in the foot in just about the dumbest way possible, to the point where you have to wonder what the heck their strategy was in trying to acquire him. Because whatever their strategy was, it was either not a good one, or was quite frankly, non-existent. Seriously, you won't believe what this team tried to do in order to sign this guy, and it didn't work out at all. Because this is the crazy story behind wide receiver Bob Grimm, the 1967 NFL-AFL Draft, and one of the dumbest draft moments in the over 60-year history of the Minnesota Vikings franchise. Before I talk about the bizarre drama involving the selection of Bob Grimm, we need some context to understand just who Bob Grimm was in the first place, and why he was highly coveted throughout the professional football landscape. The year is 1966, and Oregon State is one of the best teams in all of college football, going 7-3 with just 1 loss in conference play as a member of the American Association of Western Universities, and ending the season ranked in the coaches poll for just the 4th time in program history. And one of the reasons why the Beavers had success that year was the play of this man right here, none other than Bob Grimm, who was a true jack of all trades. You want to talk about players who could do it all out of the backfield and not only run the ball, but catch it as well? Bob Grimm is your guy. That season, he had 470 rushing yards, which was the 2nd most on the team, and had 6.6 yards per carry, which was the highest average on the team and more than a full yard ahead of anyone else to have more than 1 carry that season. And if that wasn't enough, he was an awfully good receiver too, finishing the year with 25 receptions for 289 yards, both of which were the top totals on the Beavers, and by a lot. For some perspective on just how important Grimm was to this offense, he had 25 receptions. The next closest player on the team was Roger Cantlin, who had 8. Grimm had more than triple the receptions of the next best player on the team. And he also had 289 receiving yards, with the next closest player on the team in that category being Gary Hauser, who had 90. Once again, Grimm had more than triple the receiving yards of the next best player on the team. Because of his dynamic ability anytime he had the ball in his hands, he was one of the most feared players on the West Coast, ending the season with 759 yards from scrimmage, which ranked third in the entire conference, only behind Pete Pfeiffer, his teammate, and UCLA running back Mel Farr, who got Heisman votes that season and eventually was named a two-time Pro Bowler with the Detroit Lions, as well as the AP Offensive Rookie of the Year. Not bad company to be in, if I do say so myself. His draft stock was already rising after that great 1966 season due to his unique skill set and the way you could use him on offense, as well as his versatility. And it was rising even more after an impressive Senior Bowl performance in front of the scouts. As one writer said on Grimm, Bob Grimm became a celebrity in town. He was here on some football business, and left with a noise like thunder and a trophy as big as a brass factory. There were people watching this Bob Grimm who took a liking to every move. For this work in the Senior Bowl, he was named the most valuable back, but by all rights, he should have been named the most valuable player. Professional scouts began thumbing through their books to the G's. Up to that time, Grimm to them had meant a fierce expression, and it wasn't spelt with a capital G. Now, he became an instrument that all of them might put to use in some capacity or another. Some came here after their fame had already arrived, but for Bob Grimm, this is where he found it. That is strong praise, like really strong praise. And considering the fact that he had 76 rushing yards on 9.5 yards per carry and had 91 receiving yards, meaning that he ended the Senior Bowl with a whopping 167 yards from scrimmage, I can't say it wasn't undeserved at all. You had headlines all across the country saying that Bob Grimm stole the show. At this point, it was obvious. Grimm was going to be a highly touted player and was going to have a chance to continue his professional football career. With that, 2 months after the Senior Bowl, when the 1967 NFL-AFL draft rolled around, which was the first combined draft between the two leagues, the Minnesota Vikings came calling. They were on the clock in the second round with pick number 28, and with new head coach Bud Grant, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, they needed to bolster up the offense however they could, especially in the passing game, since not only did they finish 9th in points scored out of 15 teams, finishing in the bottom half of the league, but in 3 of those games, they had under 90 yards passing, including just 43 in a 21-6 loss to the Los Angeles Rams. They had no real big-time receivers. The only 2 they had who were halfway decent were Red Phillips, who was on the wrong side of 30 and was in a serious state of decline from his heyday in the early 60s when he was with the Rams, and Paul Flatley. That's why the Vikings loaded up at wide receiver early on with the huge surplus of picks that they had, picking 4 times inside the top 28 thanks to some wheeling and dealing, including the Fran Tarkenton trade with the New York Giants. They chose Michigan State wide receiver Gene Washington in the first round, and doubled down by taking Oregon State wideout Bob Grimm in the second round. Just like that, Grimm's dream had been achieved. After being offered just 1 football scholarship, which came from Oregon State, he had now overcome the odds and made it to the NFL. However, the Vikings were not the only team to show interest in the services of Bob Grimm, because another team that really wanted him came in the rival Canadian Football League with the British Columbia Lions. Now, from all indications, it seemed as though Grimm was leaning toward playing in the NFL rather than the CFL. He said that Bud Grant seemed like a great head coach, and said on the Vikings, "It sounds like a good situation." He also added that he wasn't sure what position he would play with the Vikings, so he was definitely thinking about his future in terms of being in Minnesota, saying, "When they called me yesterday, they had some writers on the other end of the line for an interview. They asked me what I wanted to play. I said, I don't care. I just wanted to play." Having said that, Even though things were looking good for the Vikings in their quest to sign Grimm and fend off the BC Lions, especially since the Vikings had more money to give, there were a few things that BC had in their favor. Number one, Grimm's best friend at Oregon State was quarterback Paul Brothers. And sure enough, BC signed Brothers to play for them. The two men were roommates for 3 years, so they had a strong bond that might be enough to persuade him to come over. Number two, the BC Lions play their games in Vancouver, which is relatively close to Corvallis. Granted, it's 400 miles away, but it's still the Pacific Northwest, and you can easily make trips back every now and then. Plus, Grimm was born in California and went to high school in California, so he was on the Pacific Coast for his entire life. Going to Minnesota could be an adjustment. Weather-wise and climate-wise and time zone-wise, even though it's a different country, Vancouver isn't too much of an adjustment. With all those factors in mind, Grimm was set to visit the Lions to talk about a contract with them, and possibly spurning the NFL to play north of the border. And it was up to this man right here, BC Lions head coach Dave Scrine, to persuade him and to pull off the heist. Now, Scrine was no dummy. He knew Bud Grant, playing with him at the University of Minnesota, so he had some inside information on Grant that maybe Grimm wasn't privy to. He also knew Minnesota well, seeing as he was born there, being born in Morris, played there, and coached at various schools in the state, including an assistant coach at Minnesota in 1958 and a high school football coach in 1955. And he was a Grey Cup champion, guiding the BC Lions to their first Grey Cup title in franchise history in 1964, as well as an appearance in the game in 1963. On paper, he seemed like the perfect salesman. He had all the answers and the necessary background information. If anyone was going to pull this off and get a second-round pick to play in Vancouver for less money than he would make in the NFL, it was Scrine. So what was Scrine's grand pitch? You're not that good. Seriously, that was the play. By telling him how much he stinks and isn't cut out for the NFL. As Scrine said, frankly, I was surprised the Vikings drafted Grimm that high. Grimm is a player without a real position. He is not a great running back or an outstanding flanker. I'm sorry, what? That's your pitch? You're shocked the Vikings took him that high because he's not very good, doesn't have a real position, and can't play running back or wide receiver that well? Why on earth did you expect this to work? There's a difference between a strategy where a coach tries to recruit a player by telling him the things he needs to improve on and why this school is the best place to do it, and then whatever the heck this strategy was. First off, the Vikings drafted him in the second round. That obviously means they think he's a pretty good player and they know how to use him. And it would be one thing if you said his game was better suited for the CFL versus the NFL because he can do more and because of the field being different. But that argument, even if it was made, kind of goes out the window when you realize that the man the Vikings hire as their head coach came directly from the CFL after having a decade of success there. So he clearly saw something that would translate well to the NFL with his game. So saying that he's not great, when the Vikings clearly think otherwise, is a bizarre move. Second, if you're calling him a player without a real position, last time I checked, there are positions in the CFL. Players play positions up there. They aren't positionless. So what are you going to do? There are still running backs and wide receivers up in Canada. Yes, the rules are a bit different, but the positions and the concepts are the same. That's like me trying to convince a baseball player to sign in America versus Japan by saying that he's not a good second baseman or shortstop, even though both of those positions exist in both leagues and countries. Like, I'm just trying to understand the logic here. You're already behind the 8 ball by being the inferior league, and by your own admission, not having as much money. And your grand plan to try and sign him is to say that you're surprised that the Vikings picked him that high and believed in him that much? Because you don't think he's that good? I'm baffled. Just truly baffled. Just think about it from a psychological standpoint. If you have two options of where to go, one option really likes you, and the other option doesn't value you that much, which place are you going to go? Which place are you going to feel more welcome? You're picking the first option every single time. And unsurprisingly, as you can tell from the highlights, this strategy did not work out. Not at all. I'm truly shocked, I tell you. Grimm signed a few weeks later with the Minnesota Vikings, and went on to have a pretty successful career in the NFL. He played 11 seasons in the league, spending 7 of those with Minnesota from 1967 to 71 and 1976 to 77, spending 3 seasons with the New York Giants in between that, and spending 1 season with the Chicago Bears. In total, Grimm had 194 receptions for 2,914 yards and 16 touchdowns, capped off by a 1971 season with the Vikings, where he had career highs in every category and helped guide the Vikings to the playoffs, with 45 receptions for 691 yards and 7 touchdowns, with his 7 touchdowns being the 5th most in the NFL that season. For his efforts, not only did various publications give him first-team All-Conference honors, including the Sporting News and UPI, but he made it to the first and only Pro Bowl of his career. For a guy who started off as a high school quarterback with 1 scholarship offer, to play over a decade in the NFL and make a Pro Bowl is pretty good. And look, I'm not saying that Grimm would have played in Canada if Scrine didn't make those comments. Grimm had an agent, and he was probably going to take the money, and the Vikings had the money. But the comments definitely didn't help matters, I'll tell you that much. It's like matching with a girl on a dating profile and saying, "I'm surprised that other guys match with you, because I don't think you're that attractive, and you don't seem that fun. Try that out. See how that works out for you." Because I think it's safe to say that after those comments made by Scrine, that the odds that the BC Lions would sign Bob Grimm away from the NFL and the Minnesota Vikings were quite grim. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.